Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This recently came up again within a group of friends, so I decided that I would share it with more people. About 4 years ago, I started dating a girl that I met online named Kendra. We matched, she messaged me first, and we actually hit it off pretty quickly. We started officially dating after the 3rd date, and everything seemed fine. She was pretty fun to be around, even if we were just chilling at home. She was very open about herself and her past, which was nice that she was open, but it also made me let my guard down at first. I kind of felt bad for her. She explained how she didn't have a good childhood as her mother was very abusive to her, and she didn't know her father, so she moved in with her boyfriend at that time when she was 16. She then explained how she got pregnant and her boyfriend didn't want the kid and suffocated their baby at like 2 months old. She seemed pretty happy, but obviously she had some issues, but definitely nothing that I thought was a deal breaker or anything. But then as the months went on, her stories became wilder and wilder. The stories she would tell me were so bizarre that they became hard to believe, especially when they were brought up in situations that would benefit her. Like, if I was planning on going somewhere with friends or family, she would make me feel about her childhood trauma and says that she doesn't want to be left alone. When I did suggest that she come along with me to take my dog to the park or something, she would decline, saying that she couldn't walk or stand long due to her condition. She claimed that she had some kind of infection in her leg that permanently damaged the muscle or bone, so she couldn't walk long distances. Yet, she's dragged me to her friends' parties where she stood and danced for hours. She also claimed that she had to dye her hair black. She was a natural blonde, but she had to dye her hair because the light color absorbed too much sunlight and it was giving her a brain tumor. She said this was directly from her doctor, that she could have surgery and have her head shaved, or she could just keep dyeing her hair. Look, I don't know why I stayed with her at that point, but I guess I just thought that maybe she still had things to work out from her childhood and that I could help her move on. I had no reason not to believe her about her family or her baby, so I guess I tried to just move past it. However, it did start to take its toll on me as she started having an excuse for literally everything. It was pretty obvious. When it was something that she wasn't interested in or wanted to do, she had an excuse. And when I would tell her that I was still going without her, something would happen to try and stop me. For example, every Wednesday, me and a few of my friends would gather for game night. We were all off on Thursday, so it was easier than on the weekends, and I never missed. I invited her to go, but she didn't want to. I told her then that I would call her when I left. She would call me halfway through, complaining that she wasn't feeling well and wanted me to pick something up for her, or that she needed me to take her to the ER because she had an accident like cutting her finger or something. Even when I was with her and friends, if I got into a conversation or we started having fun, she would be very dramatic and grab her leg or stomach or something, anything. And of course, everyone would turn and ask her if she was okay, so now the attention is on her. Illnesses were a common tactic with her. I started to learn pretty quickly who she really was. The whole time I was with her, she didn't even have a job. She pretty quickly started to leech onto me and my wallet, but I just ignored it, believing that I was in love. And when she didn't get her way, she threw a fit, and we would make up in the form of me buying her something. I really started to put things together and grew more suspicious when she invited me to go with her and her sister to lunch and shopping. She thought of me as her bank account. Along with telling me that she was abused, she also claimed to be an only child. When I mentioned this to her, she became angry and wouldn't give me a straight answer other than I was obviously remembering wrong. I know for a fact that she told me she was an only child because she used the sob story many times that she had no one because it was just her and her abusive mom. So, being curious, I went with her to meet this mystery sister. And to my surprise, they looked very much alike. I have siblings too, and I know we all look similar, but they look like they could be twins. And that's because they were. The only real difference was her sister had a darker blonde hair color and a mole above her eyebrow. Listening to them talk about things made me feel like a lot of things Kendra had told me was a lie. There were things her sister would even bring up, and she would get upset and say that she didn't want to talk about it. I caught both of them looking over at me at times. So after that day, I went home with a lot of questions and really debated on how to bring them up. It turns out I wouldn't have to do much, as the next day, her sister sent me a message request on Facebook. She was kind, and it started as a nice to meet you kind of thing. But then after a few hours, she said she had some questions for me. She asked me if Kendra had mentioned their childhood to me, and I said yes. But after us both beating around the bush some more, it was finally revealed that she was never abused. In fact, Kendra was the abuser. They were actually twins and they had a younger sister. Kendra would constantly attack both of them, and as a teenager, she even hit her mom. Hell, her parents were married and her dad was even still alive. She was never kicked out, but rather went to a juvenile detention due to threatening her little sister with a knife, and she never had a kid. Her sister apologized as she knew that she was a habitual liar and wanted to know what all I knew or was told. I thanked her for being honest, and I took the rest of the day to really think about what to do. I finally got up the courage and I told her that we needed to talk, and I asked her if I could come over. I figured that it would be easier to leave her place than kicking her out of mine. So I went over and I told her that I wanted to talk to her about some things that she has told me, and I confronted her about her lies. I told her that her sister told me everything and I wanted to give her one last chance. I wanted to hear the truth from her, and I wanted to know why lie about any of it. But instead of coming clean, she just doubled down on the lies and tried saying that she was her half-sister and she was just trying to take me from her. Her sister even told me that she would probably try that too. I told her that I had enough and that we were done. If she couldn't be honest with me, it wasn't going to work out. I guess one thing that I didn't really take into consideration though was when her sister mentioned that Kendra was the abuser. So when I turned around to grab my jacket and leave, she started screaming and then ran towards me. She was jumping on my back. We went back and forth like this, of me struggling to get her off because she had her legs wrapped around me and had a tight grip on my hair with one hand while punching me in the head and shoulders with the other. I finally managed to throw myself backwards onto her kitchen floor where she let go. But before I could get to my feet, I was hit in the head and I was knocked out cold. The next thing I remember, there were cops and EMTs standing over me in her house, asking me a bunch of questions. And once they checked me out to make sure that I was okay to stand, I was placed in cuffs and put in the back of a squad car. After being taken back to the station, I was finally questioned and given the opportunity to explain my side of things. I told them why I was there, how I knew Kendra, what led to me being on the kitchen floor, but I didn't know how I got there. They asked me if I had physically harmed her at all, and I explained other than pretty much dropping her on the floor as well as myself, I hadn't touched her. And after a few hours, they finally let me go, but not before telling me how they got involved. Apparently, she hit me in the head with a meat tenderizer. So they told me that I should still go to the hospital to check if I had a concussion afterwards. Then, they were called by a neighbor as she was running up and down the street outside, screaming for help. She told them that I had barged into her place in a fit of rage after she broke up with me, and then I attacked her. They checked us both out and took pictures. And since I had multiple marks on my back, my head, my shoulders, and my face, and she had not a single scratch or bruise, they believed me. They suggested that I stay away from her though, and I promised them just that. I just went home and I talked to a few friends about what happened, and I even messaged her sister to let her know what she did. Kendra tried calling me a few times, but nope, all to voicemail for her. She stopped trying pretty quickly, thank God, and I just moved on, living to tell my crazy ex tale. Until this past Christmas, when she tried to add me on Facebook, that was an immediate block. My story starts back when I was 19 years old. As a lot of young girls do, I didn't have the best self-esteem, and I clung to people that showed interest in me, be it just platonic or romantic. This is when I met a man named Rich. He was about 12 years my senior, and at that time, I just saw him as a good friend. I was working at a local thrift store, and he came in there a few times, and in fact, I think I caused him to frequent there more often. He was always kind to me and seemed to actually care. He would ask how work was going and how my week had been. I was wanting to go to college, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in yet. When the store was slow, he even talked to me about what I was interested in and tried to help me find my way. I had never experienced this kind of attention, so I guess I was falling for it. It started as me just hanging out with him after work as friends. He had taken me out for dinner many times, and I even went to his house, as I was still living at my home. My parents had even met him, and why they never questioned their 19-year-old daughter hanging out with a 31-year-old was beyond me. But then, things turned romantic between us. I truly felt that I had found my prince and that we would have this happily ever after life. At the age of 20, less than a year after we met, I became pregnant. He even assured me that he would always be there to take care of the both of us. He welcomed me to move in with him officially, and even convinced me to quit my job, promising that we would financially be fine, and that way I could focus on being the best mom that I could to our child. Everything was going as he promised, too. The whole time that I was pregnant, we were in that honeymoon phase. He did everything for me. He went to all my appointments, he helped me when I was sick, and he even catered to my silly cravings. But then, when our daughter Adelaide was born, I fell in love all over again. Even after she arrived, we were doing great. We were both happy. She was healthy, and we learned how to be the best parents that we could together. We did have a few moments here or there, like when she would wake up throughout the night or when nothing we would do seemed to comfort her. But I thought that that was just the nervousness and stress of being a parent. My grandmother, though, has been my rock throughout my life. and she was on the speed dial at any time that I had concerns. Needless to say, she helped me through a lot. But things started slowly turning sour day by day, and it really broke me. It would start as Rich having to work late a lot, so I saw him less. And when he would come home, he seemed to be in a bad mood, or just really didn't want to talk about it. He was an electrical engineer, so I'm sure that it was stressful, as all jobs have their bad days. But he just never seemed to want to talk to me about it anymore. And then he would just call me to say that he wouldn't be home for dinner and not to stay up for him. Again, he would claim that it was work-related, but I had my doubts. And when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. But I had my doubts when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. In fact, I started seeing him less and less as a whole. I would see him off in the morning, but then that was about it. Even on the days that he was off or had an event to go to, he did not want to be around me. He stayed out, and he didn't have me go with him. He used to take me and Addie to his parents' place on occasion, but when I got ready to go once, he got mad at me for assuming and then left us there. It got to the point that the only time that I left the house was to get the mail or occasionally get groceries after nagging him about it being low. He failed to realize this because he was hardly home to eat with us. He became verbally abusive and mocked me when I tried to ask him for the simplest things or for any kind of intimacy from him. I craved our conversations, our silly inside jokes, or even just holding each other on the couch. I became severely reclusive and depressed. I hardly talked to my friends or family, and I certainly didn't get to go anywhere or do anything because I didn't even have my own money. Hell, I even tried talking to him about going to school so that I could help pay for things, and he wouldn't have it. He would shut it down every time, saying that it was too late for that now and that I was stupid for even considering it. As I mentioned earlier, the only thing other than my little girl that kept me going was my grandma. I talked to her about everything, and when I stopped calling her weekly, or seemed to want to talk very long, she surprised me with a visit and brought her homemade chicken casserole and some groceries. I broke down, and I told her what had been going on, and she told me that I needed to give him an ultimatum and stick to it. Rich was definitely verbally abusive but never physically so she definitely gave me the strength to do it. To wrap up the sob story, I guess, the ultimatum kind of did not go in my favor, or at least not how I would have wanted. He kicked me out. He told me that I was just ungrateful and that I could just leave. I tried talking to him about Addie, but that's when he dropped it on me that he couldn't care less about her as she didn't believe that she was his kid. He was my first serious relationship, and I was a virgin when I met him. Well, heartbroken me, I packed up the few things that I had that were important to me, and all of Addie's things, and then I moved in with my grandparents until I got back on my feet. Fast forward about 4 years, and I am still with my grandparents, but we are all happy. My grandfather had an accident, so I decided to stay to help my grandma take care of him. They loved spending time with Addie and watching her while I was in school. Yes, I finally started school and I was working part-time and I loved it. I was happy with my life, even as a single parent. Addie even started going to pre-K, and I would pick her up before I went to class in the evenings. Well, that's where things went downhill again. The school Addie was going to was very big on security, which is why I chose them. So when I got a call from them saying that someone that was not authorized tried to pick her up early, they called me immediately. Only my grandparents and sister were on the authorized pickup list. I left work and I went to the school when I saw cop cars around. I had to show ID and I had to be checked before they let me in. Little did I know that the cops were there because of me and Addie. The principal described the guy that attempted to get Addie, and when they refused to let them, saying that they would call me first to ask, they stormed out. That's when they called me, and shortly after, they had a lockdown as they saw the same guy walking the fence of the play area where the kids were about to be released from recess. And rightfully so, they feared that he may try to do something to the kids or even abduct Addie. As you may have guessed, it was Rich. I hadn't gotten as much as a phone call from him in years. And here he was, trying to take our kid from school, and our kid that he wanted nothing to do with. They had me identify him later that day as they caught him hanging around the school and had him in custody. After a lot of back and forth with him and the cops, it came down to him wanting a relationship with his daughter. Now, nearly 5 years later, he cares? I hated it. I felt like this was him trying to control me again, but once again, my grandma talked me through it and said to keep an open mind. There didn't need to be anything between us other than being parents to the same child, but if he's changed, maybe he can actually be a good father. So after a lot of lawyer talk, we worked out a supervised visitation. If I wasn't present, my sister and her husband were there. If he would try to take her from school, I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to take her if they were alone. And as expected, he used this time to try to get back with me. When that didn't work, he would become angry and then end the visitation. When my sister and brother-in-law went, he brought another girl with him and was too busy with her to pay attention to Addie. It was just an attempt to make me jealous, I guess. And one of the last times that I saw him, it was just me again, and when I finally put my foot down telling him that I was here for Addie and not him, and that I didn't want a relationship with him. He went in to kiss me, and when I pulled away, he slapped me, saying that it would be the biggest mistake that I've ever made and how I wasn't thinking about our daughter. I grabbed Addie, who had been playing alone at the park, and we left. I was ready to get a stern talking to for ending his visitation early, but I never got a call. This was obviously his main motive, as once again, I never heard from him. He stopped showing up to visitations, he wouldn't answer my calls, and even his lawyer gave me the whole "don't call me, I'll call you" line, and that was it. It's been 3 years since then, and I know it probably sounds bad and selfish, but I hope that I never hear from him again. Addie deserves to have a father in her life that cares for her, and not just as a way to get to me. And until then, my grandfather has filled that role really well, and I can't thank them enough. I just have that fear in the back of my mind that he's going to show up one day and attempt to take her again. I hope she's never in a position to allow that to happen. Back in 2017, I was in a pretty healthy relationship. Charlotte and I had been together for almost 3 years, and we were thinking about the future. We started looking at apartments together, and if things continued to go as well as they had been, I was going to save up to propose to her. However, even though a lot of the places we looked at were her choice, and she seemed so excited about this, she threw a huge curveball at me. She told me that she had a great career opportunity in Oregon. We lived in Missouri. At first I thought, okay, a cross-country move is a huge step, but I was willing to do it if it meant a better life for the both of us. And even if it was kind of scary, moving out of state could also be exciting. But much to my surprise, Her plans did not involve me. She said she wanted to make a life for herself out there first before she thought about a relationship. And before I could even recommend it, she shot down the long distance thing, saying that she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't cheat. It really hurt, but at least she was honest. I didn't know how to feel though. I understand wanting to do what's best for your own good, but why even consider apartment searching? Why lead me on to believe that we had a future together? Overall, I was definitely upset and heartbroken, but I moved on, wishing her the best. But I wasn't the only one caught off guard by this. Even some of her family found it odd. I was actually pretty good friends with her younger brother, as that's how I met her, and he was telling me how their parents were shocked that she just left everything behind. They were worried that maybe something sinister was going on and forcing her to leave out of fear or something. But she assured everyone that that was not the case, and even showed us pictures of her new place and shared some links to the place that she was going to be working for. It was an illustration company. Well, knowing that she was at least okay, we tried talking to her here and there, but I think overall, it just made me feel worse, so we agreed that it was best to cut ties. Now, it's been several years since this event happened. I've entirely moved on and I'm happy. I decided to make some changes in my life too, and I got a new job. I met a girl named Valerie that worked at the same place as me, and I could instantly tell that there was a connection. We went on a date, hit it off immediately, and we had been together for about 4 years now. Charlotte wasn't even a thought in my mind. I was still good friends with her brother, but we hardly talked, but that was just life. So, needless to say, I wanted to propose to Valerie, and when I got hints from her and her friends, I took it as the go-ahead. Things definitely felt different, but in a good way compared to Charlotte. And to make it the second best day of my life, she said yes. At that point, life started moving pretty quickly. So when I was waiting in line to get coffee, I didn't notice the people around me until I heard my old nickname, making me look around. That's when I saw Charlotte. We hugged, and I asked her what she was doing here. She explained that she was thinking about moving back, but was just visiting for a week. We quickly caught up for a bit, and she suggested that we grab a coffee or lunch together sometime. I agreed. I gave her another hug, and then I left. I even went home and I told Val that I had run into her. We were very open with each other, and she knew of Charlotte, so she saw no issues with us catching up either. It was probably a few days after that we met up at the same place. We sat and talked about the past years. She showed me so many places of Oregon and places that she went to, and even a few famous people that she met through her work. So I asked her, since things were going so well, why she would want to move back there. Her answer was vague, but she said something about being able to work on her own time, and she wanted to be closer to her family. Then she turned the conversation on me, and I told her that I was engaged. She looked surprised, but also said that she was happy for me. As we continued to talk, I noticed her becoming more and more hands-on. She would touch my shoulder, going down my arm. She would grab my hands or even rub my leg with her foot. It was a weird feeling, to say the least. It reminded me of who she was when we were together. I mean, I didn't feel anything as I was in love with Val, but the thought was in the back of my head. Was she trying to do something? Was this her flirting? I tried not to think about it, and we parted after a few hours. When I saw Valerie that evening, I told her what happened and she really found it odd and even thought maybe there was a hint of jealousy from Charlotte. Maybe, but otherwise, she wasn't worried about it. So, again, we moved forward with our life, and I got random casual messages from Charlotte. My phone number never changed after all. However, we started having strange events occur, and honestly, never really connected them at that time. Val ended up moving to another location under the same business that we worked for, so we were no longer riding together. However, I had to take her to work one day because she went to leave one morning and her tire was flat. But it wasn't like it just lost air or like there was a nail. I didn't even have to look for the cause. Towards the back side of the tire, there was a pretty big puncture in it. It wasn't a clear cut like a knife, but it wasn't mangled like the tire just exploded. Not to mention, there was no additional damage to the car either. We were just confused, but I just took her to work and I told her that I would take care of it. Val had a pretty new car. I went with her to test it out, and it was only a few years old at that time. But she ended up having a pretty scary issue with it. We kissed each other goodbye one morning and left for the day. When we got to work, we usually texted each other one more time saying, "Have a good day," with me usually being the first one as my drive was shorter by about 15 minutes. When I didn't get a text back, I thought that it was odd, but I just assumed that she forgot or someone stopped her on her way in, both of which have happened before. So after I got in and to my desk, I was prepared to text her when she called me hysterical. When I finally got her to calm down, she explained what happened. She said that she noticed her car hesitated a little when she shifted from reverse to drive, but ignored it as it soon went away. She thought maybe she just imagined it, but made a mental note to tell me about it when she got to work. However, she wouldn't make it to work because as she rolled up to a red light, her brakes kicked back and did nothing else. She went right through that intersection at about 30 miles per hour, instantly T-boning a van. Her airbag deployed and she was obviously shaken up. She told me the police were already there and the tow trucks were on their way, so I left immediately to be with her. The sight was pretty terrifying, and I felt so bad that she had to be in that situation and alone to boot. The van had a woman and her toddler in it, but both were in their seatbelts and the kid in their car seat, so they were okay as well, just a little bit shaken up. After the scene was cleaned up, we went home and she walked me through the situation again. It definitely sounded like something happened to the brakes, so after they towed the car back, I had someone come take a look at it to see if they could diagnose the issue. They were certainly able to, and they told us that the brake line had been cut, and it was obviously done by someone that wasn't trying to replace a line or done by accident. He said you could see where they tried to cut it in multiple spots until they finally got through. We were terrified and confused. Who would try to do this? Valerie was such a kind person, and it's not like she had any enemies that came to mind, so I didn't know how to handle this. But then, she asked me if I thought Charlotte would do something like that. I also didn't see Charlotte as the type to do that, and while we talked, it was still a very casual conversation. She wouldn't have known where we lived, and while I was questioning this, she brought something to my attention that she hadn't really told me about. She had gotten a few calls at work, like they were transferred to her office line specifically looking for her. But when she would answer, they would just hang up. She thought that it was weird, sure, but nothing scary or worth mentioning. Then a few days prior to the accident, she got another call, and this time The person talked and said something with a slight giggle like, "Nice car you got," and then hung up. I was horrified. I didn't want to think about Charlotte possibly doing this or even entertain the idea. But then I remembered the way she acted when we met up. I couldn't rule it out. So I called her while Valerie was in the room so she could hear her voice. I played it off like I thought she called me and I was returning the call, so it didn't last long. But I could tell by the look on Valerie's face that it was the same voice. I was furious. Why would she try to do this? She was the one that left me behind, and now, almost a decade later, she wants to ruin my life? As mad as I was, I started coming up with a plan. I bought a camera, and I had it set up to face our driveway. Then, I texted Charlotte asking to go get coffee again. When she showed up, I was not friendly at all, like I was the first time. I asked her point blank if she was following or stalking my fiancé. She looked at me like I was crazy and denied it. But then when I mentioned her stupid phone calls, she had this stupid grin on her face and actually said that she was just trying to have a little fun. "But, she was pretty easy to track down," she said. She admitted to the calls, but would never fess up about the car. But after I chewed her out some, she started to show her true colors. She said that I was the one in the wrong. I was supposed to wait for her to come back and have a relationship with her again and her only. That was never the case. She broke up with me and she ended it because she obviously had plans to hook up with other people. Why did I have to wait around for her? I was supposed to be all alone those years? Hell no. I told her that she was crazy and she needed to leave us alone because we were happy and I would never, ever be with her again or want to talk to her again. And I left that place feeling much better already. I knew we wouldn't really be able to take legal action though unless we had proof. And that was why the camera came in. I had a feeling that she would try something again, and I was right. It was 3 or 4 days later when we checked the camera, as we do every time before we leave, and we were also sharing a car at the same time. There she was, clear as day, walking around and inspecting my car. She then proceeded to pour something in my gas tank, wiped off the side and the cover, prints I assume, and climbed on the hood and pulled her pants down and squatted. I'll let you fill in the rest. Charlotte has absolutely lost it. I have never seen this side of her, and I was frustrated and embarrassed that I ever let her back into my life. Sorry, this took so long, but to wrap it up, we pressed charges, filed restraining orders, and were able to sue her for the damages to my car, at least. And as we expected, we never heard from her again, and thankfully, her brother had no ill will towards me either. He said that she complained to him about me being engaged, and he basically told her to get over it, like I did, because I had to move on. I think exes are better left at that too. No friends, no contact, just old memories. Good or bad, I suppose. I have a story that I've been wanting to share with the world for a while. A story that really taught me a lesson about trusting people and made me realize that things can go really bad, really fast. I am going to add a bit of a trigger warning here, as this story does end in a horrifying way. This happened a while back when my high school ex-boyfriend, a guy we're going to call Christian, came back into my life after close to a decade of being out of touch. Back in high school, Christian and I were really close. He was probably the most connected relationship that I've ever had, if that makes any sense. He was actually the first guy that I got with, in multiple meanings of the word, and I thought that he and I had this really bright future planned out. In my head, we were going to get married, we were going to have kids, and we were going to grow old together. In reality, Christian didn't want more than a high school fling that he planned on cutting away from the minute he graduated. He ended up telling me as much only a quarter away from graduation. We were talking about the future, and when I asked if we were going to stay in state, he said that after May, there was no we. Well, needless to say, we broke up that day, and it crushed me. Fast forward around 8 or 9 years later, and I'm single, living my best life, and just doing whatever life brings my way, when out of the blue, I get a friend request on Facebook from a face that I hadn't thought about in ages. Christian. Being the nostalgic idiot that I am, I immediately went to accept it. But I hesitated when I thought about how our relationship ended. I sat on it for a couple hours, but eventually decided that we were both young, we both made mistakes, and it wasn't anything more than a friend request on Facebook. If he had grown up enough to seek me out and reconnect, then I could grow up enough to accept it. But what I didn't expect was that clicking that button was going to be the opening of my own personal Pandora's box. At first, everything was chill. We messaged back and forth, and it seemed like he really had his life together. After high school, he went out of state for college, and he had actually gotten married and had a son. I congratulated him for all that, saying that it was great to hear that he was doing well. But then, he told me that he and his wife had gotten a divorce, and she had done everything that she could to keep his son from him, so he was actually moving back in with his mom for a bit to get back on his feet. I apologized, and I told him that this was awful, and after a bit of talking more, he told me that he was actually in town, and we agreed to meet up for lunch the next day to just catch up. Now, nowhere in this conversation and nowhere in my mind was there any intentions of making this anything beyond just being friends. I didn't want anything beyond that. I just wanted a friend and wanted to meet up to catch up with him. When we met at the restaurant, I went in for a friendly hug, and when he hugged me, his hand wandered way too far down my back. I immediately pushed away and looked at him like, "Bro, what the hell?" He quickly apologized and said that he just got absorbed in the moment and didn't mean anything by it. I told him that this was his one warning and that if he tried anything else, this meeting was over, which I think caught him off guard. I think he expected me to be a bit more submissive, mostly because when I was young, I was way more willing to go along with things. But in the years since then, I've become a lot more self-sufficient and mentally sound, and I'm not the kind of person to take crap. I told him as much, and he nodded, saying all right and continuing to apologize. The rest of the lunch went pretty normal. Nothing else happened, and I figured he knew his place. Of course, that was the wrong thing to believe. About 2 days later, I got a message from Christian on Facebook that said, "Thinking of you," with a picture of something that I genuinely did not expect nor want to see. The situation was very disappointing for multiple reasons, and I had told him that that was the end of it. I replied saying, "I told you that if you did anything like this again, that would be the end of it." He immediately said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. That was for someone else, I swear." I messaged back saying that it was nice to see that he was doing well, but that this was the end of our conversations, and then I immediately blocked him. I'm not stupid. I knew what he was doing, and I wasn't going to be a rebound fling. Plus, he's not exactly the kind of person that I'm into anymore. After that, the situation with Christian went off the rails, and did so pretty quickly. One night, about 2 weeks later, I was out with some friends at a local bar, just trying to have a good time. And lo and behold, Christian showed up. He walked in and came straight over to us, acting like he was my best friend. The entire feel of the night changed immediately. My 3 friends all glanced at me like, "Who is this guy?" And Christian stood over me and smiled like everything was fine. I hit my limit the second that he put his hands on my shoulders and said, "How are you doing, babe?" I shoved my seat backwards to make sure that it made contact with him. I stood up, turned around and told him that I wasn't his babe and that he needed to leave me alone. He laughed and asked why I was being like this, and I went off on him. I told him that I had given him a chance to be my friend and nothing more, and he decided that he wanted to be a creep instead. I told him again to shove off and get the hell back out of my life. After a few minutes, he backed off and looked like he was about to cry and then just walked away. I kind of assumed that was going to be the end of it, that he would understand that I wanted nothing to do with him. Either that or the next encounter was going to end violently. And fortunately for me, it was more likely to be the latter. After Christian left, the whole night was ruined and we all decided to head home. I had driven my friend Michelle out that night. She had planned on drinking a bit more and I don't really drink, so I was her driver. When we left, she asked me who Christian was and I explained everything to her. And she told me that he sounded like a creep, and then asked me if I wanted her to come over to my place and stay just in case. At first, I didn't think it was necessary, but after a bit of contemplation, I told her that it sounded like a good idea and that I would really appreciate it. I'm going to add a bit of a brief pause right there for the sake of anyone reading or listening to this. The next part of the story is the part that deserves the content warning. When we got to my apartment, and I unlocked and opened the door, and both myself and Michelle were surprised to see Christian sitting on my couch. Now, I know that a lot of these stories end with the ex standing there with a knife and attacking the person, but that's not actually how my story ended. Christian was sitting on my couch. He did have a knife, but he wasn't going to attack anyone. He had pretty clearly ended his own life right there. I was shocked, horrified, and I felt like I was going to throw up. Right there on my couch was my high school ex, a guy that I had just reconnected with and had to push back out of my life because he was being a creep, and he'd ended his own life in my apartment. I cannot overstate how traumatizing this was for me at that moment and every day since then. Obviously, we called the police. When they and the medic showed up, they confirmed that he was beyond saving. I couldn't stay there after that. They had to treat it basically as a crime scene with what had happened, and I didn't want to stay there anyways. This was enough to get me out of my lease, thankfully, and I ended up moving in with Michelle in her apartment. I got rid of pretty much all my furniture as I couldn't bring myself to look at it and think about Christian. I've had nightmares about him since, about that whole moment opening my door, and to say that this whole thing has haunted me is an understatement. I'm not looking for pity, and I feel terrible for the fact that Christian felt that ending his own life was the best course of action. I'm just not really sure what else to say about all of it. Through all of this, coming to terms with the situation and moving my few things out, I did end up finding a note from Christian in my bedroom. He had placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. It was a simple note that just said, "Every mistake in my life has led me to this moment, and all I can say is that I'm sorry." It's not exactly closure, and not exactly something that helped me move on from it, and I don't know if I ever will get through it. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.